Viewer discretion is advised. Prologue. Bad things come in threes. 2033. Zancudo, Ecuador. Deep in the South American jungles of Ecuador, twilight begins to settle in. A slight mist begins to roll off a nearby river known as the Agua Rico. A light, murky brown river that seems frozen to the eye. As the mist rolls across the muddy banks, it slowly begins to be swept away, and then rapidly parts as a loud rumble begins to descend on the forest terrain. Within seconds, all the trees begin to dance from the force of the ubiquitous entry. The large military cargo helicopter touches down in a clearing 150 yards north of the river, but within the dense jungle. While the propellers are still going at top speed, three figures in white hazmat suits jump from the vehicle and run in hunched-over positions while covering their heads. They were all holding their hazmat head coverings under their arms, and each had briefcases with them. They made their way to a concrete structure about the size of a small barn. One of the men looks around and takes in his new surroundings. He notices the high electric fences guarding the clearing from the dense outside jungle with warning signs along the fencing. As his eyes drift up, he notices cameras posted on the top of the fence facing inward. Then a look of anxiety began to wash over his face. A look that said he expected what he was seeing, but still found it unsettling because he watched the ubiquitous ascend into the air and disappear as quickly as it had arrived. They were alone. "It's too late to turn back now, Charlie." Charlie nodded his head. "We only have 3 minutes to input the codes." Sal was right. He was looking at his watch with worry and stress in his eyes. He looked back up at Jack and Renee. They needed to move quickly. The three of them ran inside the concrete structure. They came to a solid steel door. On both sides of the door were small black boxes bolted to the concrete walls. Renee and Sal scanned their badges on either box, then looked at Charlie. Charlie slowly approached the box on the right, reached out his hand, and opened the front cover of the box. Inside, there were buttons for numbers, just like an old payphone would have. He took a deep breath and began punching the code in. Once he was done, he closed his eyes and clenched his jaw, hoping he had not made a mistake. Just then, the steel door opened. A look of pure relief washed over all their faces. On the other side of the now open steel door, an elevator was ready for them to board. They all got in. The elevator room was extremely bright and lined with stainless steel siding. There were no buttons, no certificate of inspection like your typical elevator. Just 4 walls, a ceiling, and a floor. As they all looked at one another, they simultaneously put on their hazmat head and face coverings as the outer elevator shaft steel door closed, shortly followed by the steel elevator door itself. "How far does this go down?" He looked to Sal for a response. Instead, Renee responded in her British accent. 3,000, 218 meters, roughly. Charlie looked from Renee to Sal with a bit of confusion. Sal just smiled at Charlie. 2 miles underground, he translated. Charlie hesitated and then looked at Renee. That's deeper than Jinping. Renee looked at Sal, rolled her eyes, and looked back at Charlie. Jinping is underground, yes, but built into the side of the Jinping Mountains. We are going straight down. He heard the disdain in her voice, but didn't care. He had a job to do here, and he might not be Enrico Fermi, but he knew his job was just as important as theirs. I hate confined spaces, Charlie muttered under his breath. Sal put a hand on his shoulder. Don't worry, Charlie. This elevator was built to sustain a blast from a bomb. For some reason, that cued both Sal and Renee to look at Charlie's briefcase for a second. Shit, if that happened, the damn thing would probably still even work. The three began staring at the ceiling, like polite elevator goers anywhere else would. They were closing in on ground level when another conversation transpired. Charlie looked up at Sal. Charlie, remember, do not touch anything. Keep your distance from the specimen, and for God's sake, keep your cool. Sal looked down at Charlie's side, where he was holding his briefcase once again, and so did Charlie. He then looked back at Sal, glanced at Renee, and back at Sal again. He noticed the two referencing his carry-on quite a lot, and thought he should put it to rest. You guys get your jobs done right, and I won't even have to open it. He gave Sal a slight smile. Renee and Sal gave each other a concerned look. Having a military officer in their laboratory made them both exceedingly nervous. The steel doors finally opened. Here we are, boys. They slowly exited the elevator. Charlie looked amazed. This was unbelievable. The room they were in was supposed to be a laboratory, but this looked more like an aircraft hangar. It was completely concrete. The ceiling was dome-shaped, completely curved from top to bottom. It was like being in a concrete observatory, but with no retracting doors in the roof for a telescope, and definitely no telescope. Instead, in the middle was a large cage made of steel bars. You couldn't see anything through the cage because curtains hung on all sides of it from the inside. It wasn't like other labs either. The room was dimly lit, and the ground, made of dark brown concrete, completed itself with a reflective luster. The walls were smooth, made of cinder block-like material, and stood about 15 feet high before blending into their dome existence. The room was shaped like a rectangle, spreading a good distance from the elevator doors, procuring a long subterranean recession for the lab. Charlie noticed cameras, just like the ones now miles overhead. They were being watched. As they walked up to the cage, Sal reached out to a control panel attached to it and pressed a button. The curtains withdrew, and lights flooded the entirety of the cage. And there it was, laying on the ground. Its human-made home was a cold concrete slab, glass walls, and steel bars on the outside. The creature was extremely thin and sickly looking. Its skin was almost reptilian, rough in texture, with spikes all over it. 4 arms protruded from both sides of the creature, along with its 2 legs. At the end of each of its 8 arms and both of its 2 legs were 2 large-fingered claws, with long, thick, and sharp nails, which seemed to be straight out of the Jurassic era. Lastly, a rhino-style protrusion adorned the back of its neck. There were more of them originally. Sal announced to the 2 of them. They were captured after taking out an entire Russian village during the Cold War. The Russians were convinced we had something to do with it. Both sides were experimenting with genetic engineering, so they assumed we had created something. They were able to subdue the alien clan to study it and possibly reverse engineer what we had done. They soon found out it was not us. Through the next 50 years, they tried studying the creatures. They experimented on them. dissected them, tried to communicate with them. After all these years, they have found nothing. Until now. This is the last one living that visited us all those years ago. The Russians turned to us for cooperation in this endeavor, as time was against them. We figured out a way to communicate with them through a mathematical code. They are far more advanced than us and can communicate through airwaves their own bodies create. They can download their thoughts right into our networks. In fact, if it wanted to, it could tap into any of our nuclear facility networks on the planet, hence this 6.5-foot thick concrete prison around us. And is that because of the virus? Charlie asked, laying on the ground half dead. Yes, it's extremely contagious. Airborne. The virus, once in the air, can travel for miles. Don't worry, it can't hurt us. It's completely incapacitated. This creature, this specimen, is the only thing on the planet that has it yet. Who knows if it got it here or came here with it? Once Dr. Shepard, Renee, and I retrieve the samples, you let us out of the cage. We exit the facility and decontaminate on the surface. Nothing will go wrong. Let us get started. Renee and Sal unlocked the steel gate and then the glass cage. They slowly walked over to the large creature with their briefcases. Each knelt on either side of it and opened their cases. Charlie closed and locked the gate and door. He watched as they spent the next minutes gathering samples from their specimen. They both stood up and headed back to the door. All right, Charlie, let's get out of here. With that said, he began to open the locks for them. As he unlocked the glass cage, he caught something out of the corner of his eye. It was a reflection on the glass on the other end of the cage. A reflection of the creature. It was standing behind the two doctors now. Charlie's startled expression caught the attention of the two doctors, and they both turned around and were greeted with the creature right before them. Two arms simultaneously protruded from the creature's sides and impaled the two. Instantly, they both began to shake and spit up blood as their specimen proceeded to tear through their chest cavities. Charlie slammed the door and began running. He thought if he could just make it to the elevator shaft, he could get away. He was most of the way there when a cold sensation swept over his body. It was shock. He looked down to see the creature's claw peeking through his abdomen. The creature retracted its claw, and Charlie fell to the ground. He couldn't see much as he lay there on the cold concrete floor, waiting to die. He could make out blurs of light and shapes. He saw what appeared to be the creature enter the elevator, and then it was gone. The elevator doors closed. Charlie rolled to his back and sighed. He knew he was dying. While the creature slowly made its way up the elevator shaft, he reached over to his briefcase and mustered up the strength to enter the combination. He opened it, and there was a laptop. He opened the laptop, and a security box came up. And inside the security box read, United States of America, Pentagon, Zancudo Underground Laboratory, detonation code entry. At the surface inside the concrete structure, steel doors begin to open. The creature, barely able to breathe or walk, began to make its way out into the open. Suddenly, the creature was swept up in an explosion from underground that traveled through the elevator shaft and was catapulted across the clearing. It's well into the evening now. The stars shined beautifully over the Ecuadorian jungles. There was a full moon out that night, making for a bright night sky as a trail of black sooty smoke burning from the rubble below made its way to a tiny Ecuadorian village 35 miles south.